when a lot of fundamental issues about the bilateral U.S.-Indian relationship are on the table, and not just the bilateral relationship, but issues of bilateral interest that have global implications, including obviously combating terrorism, stabilizing Afghanistan and the border region, the broader subcontinent, the global economic recovery, and a whole set of issues concerning the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the conditions for a possible renaissance in the use of nuclear power. We have had a welcome strengthening in the relationship between New Delhi and Washington in recent years on a number of planes, military, economic, and political. The U.S. has been engaging emerging powers to a degree, to a greater and greater degree, which is a welcome and necessary evolution. India, too, has a number of critical choices to make in its external affairs in light of a very profoundly changing global context. In light of all this, there's really no better person to discuss the next phase in the relationship than Ambassador Menon, who was instrumental in so many aspects of the relationship as Foreign Secretary, when he, among many other things, oversaw the completion of the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, in which Carnegie's Ashley Tellis played such a critical role. He has served as ambassador to China at a great time of great change in the Sino-Indian relationships, as ambassador to Israel, and as High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and Pakistan. You have his bio in front of you, so I won't go on past these few highlights of a long and extremely distinguished career. So given that our time is very tight, and I know that this audience has a whole lot of questions on the tip of its collective tongue, so I won't take more of your time. We've discussed this and agreed that Ambassador Menon will make short opening remarks and share with us the issues that are on the front of his mind, and then we'll have plenty of time in a tight morning for him for discussion with you and questions. So with that, let me say how pleased we are to have you back and to introduce Ambassador Menon to you.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews, and thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be back at Carnegie at this Center of Intellectual Excellence. I have prepared remarks, which I think we'll distribute for the sake of efficiency, because I'd much rather have a discussion with you on where we are in India-US relations and where we think we might be going. Because as you said rightly, I think we are poised at a very important moment, just before President Obama visits India. And ours is a partnership. If you look at where we are today, we've actually come a very long way in a very short time. And it's quite remarkable what we've achieved. India-US relations today are better than they ever have been before. They've been transformed into a strategic partnership because of effort by successive governments in India, successive administrations in the US. I mean, in the US and in India, it's been an effort by both sides of the political aisle to build this relationship to where it is. It gives you some sense or a measure of how intensely we're engaged when you remember that President Obama and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh have met 6 times in the last 18 months. And that's really, I think that's a pace that is unparalleled in our relationship and certainly in our relationship with other countries. Today we cooperate in every significant aspect. We have a strategic dialogue which is impressive both for its depth, its range, and for the candor and frankness with which we talk to each other. I think the symbol of that transformation, of course, has been the Civil Nuclear Initiative, which we think is now coming to the end of what the governments have to do and is really about to be purely commercial work, bringing it into practical reality on the ground. In terms of trade, the US is now India's largest trading partner. Over the last 5 years, US exports to India have grown faster than US exports to any other major economy. And faster also than Indian exports to the US. Of course, India runs a current account deficit of about 2.53% of GDP consistently. I think and our trade with the US is really basically in balance. I think what's less well known is that even trade in services is roughly balanced. I don't think that's the common impression out there, but the more we sell to the US, the more we buy from the US. And we have an exchange rate that's set by the market. But we're also working together in a whole range of fields, whether it's clean energy, on science and education. And I think the diaspora here, the Indian diaspora in the US, is living proof of the benefits of engagement, and is very strong encouragement actually to everybody in India to do more for the relationship. So basically we are at a very good place in the relationship. The bilateral underpinnings of the relationship are very strong today. But how did we manage to do this so quickly? My own explanation of this is that it's more than just a transactional relationship. Yes, there are congruent interests, and that's what we built on when we started the process and what we have worked steadily. There's a whole series of congruent interests. For us, of course, the US is a crucial partner in our attempt to transform India, to grow India so that we can abolish mass poverty. I mean, the US was a crucial partner when we did our first Green Revolution. It will be in the future as well. I would suggest that for the US as well, India today offers a reliable partner as we both try to secure our economic futures. That's something, there is huge synergy, whether in innovation, in technology, in the economy, and that's something that I hope we can look at strategically and build on for the future. But as our capacities grow in India, I think our congruence of interest on international security issues continues to grow as well. We cooperate against terrorism, whether it's our work together on the global commons, on maritime security, in outer space, regional stability, disarmament as well. I mean, if you look at it today, we're both committed to the same goals, to a world free of nuclear weapons. The question is really how to get there, and it's logical that we should work together. But quite apart from the shared interests, I think what's really crucial is the shared values and the common quest for a world that reflects those values. And that is where India is in many ways unique. India is trying, in a democratic framework, to grow the economy and develop and transform the lives of its own people. And the values that we try and apply through that process, it's not easy, but we try consistently, is pluralism, democracy, rule of law, enterprise, human rights, things that are familiar to a US audience. And it's really the commitment to those values which sometimes actually leads to the much higher expectations that we have of each other. Indians sometimes feel that the US holds India to standards that they don't apply to other people in the world. Americans think sometimes that Indians are being preachy, telling the US what they should be doing. But why do we do that? We do that because we subscribe to a set of higher values, to a set of common values, and I think that's what really has made the transformation of the relationship possible. So given this, given strong bilateral underpinnings, shared interests, common interests, shared values, what should we be expecting from the Obama visit? For me, it looks like an opportunity for both of us to actually put into place a longer-term framework for the India-US strategic partnership and to add content to the partnership in several areas that are now ripe. Our goal should really be to gear our bilateral cooperation towards making both our countries stronger, safer, and more prosperous. But as we add content to the partnership, I think we have to continue considering how our societies and economies are changing. In India, 27 years of 6% plus growth, now trending at around 8%. Demographic changes as our population gets younger, more skilled, and sociological changes, urbanization and so on, and the growth of services have profoundly impacted in the way we look at the relationship and at our own expectations of the relationship. One area where I would expect major initiatives, of course, is naturally the economy and trade, where India as a partner, as a growing market, and as a contributor to increasing the competitiveness of US companies, creating jobs in both countries, I think is what we would stress, and we would hope that the visit would result in several initiatives in this area. We seek a peaceful periphery around us while we try and grow our own economy, and we have a common interest, I think, in a secure, stable, peaceful periphery around India, in West, Central, Southeast Asia. We both seek to engage China. We both attempt to build a working relationship with Pakistan. We both contribute meaningfully in our own ways to Afghan reconstruction. And it makes sense, actually, for us to continue to build upon those commonalities. But it's also true that India-US relations today are an important factor for world peace and stability, because I think we both have a common interest in an open, inclusive, and balanced security architecture in Asia and in the world. We have for some time advocated the evolution through democratic international processes of common rules of the road for the global commons, whether it's the high seas, whether it's in space, where we think that would be useful for us all and will contribute to the common good. It becomes even more important that India and the US work together on issues like that, on global issues, as we enter a period where it looks as though you have a situation where several major powers both compete and cooperate with each other. Cooperate because of the interdependence that globalization has created between us all, but are still driven by balance of power considerations to try and compete to improve their position in the international system. So as you have both these things going on at the same time, it becomes all the more important that we cooperate, we consult, and that we work together, as we do with the other powers. I mean, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game here. It is not necessary that any of these relationships between two major powers will necessarily cut into the relations with the others. They will all deal with each other. Traditionally, I think India and the US have looked at each other across the Eurasian landmass. But, you know, the whole picture changes. Today, more than 50% of India's trade goes east to either the west coast of the US or eastwards. And if India and the US start looking at each other across the Pacific, across a space that we share and is vital to our security and prosperity, then it's a completely different view. There's much in common today in our views on disarmament, for instance. Today, the US is committed to a world free of nuclear weapons. That's a goal that we have espoused for considerable time. So when you look at the range of international issues, I think we're at a moment where it's logical for us to work together. The one that interests us, of course, is also reform of the international institutions of governance, of whether it's the UN Security Council. Some of it on the economic side has already happened in terms of cooperation in the G20 and the G20's role in global economic management. So to sum up, I think there's a great deal of potential. There's enough ballast there in the relationship now to be able to think of taking it to a new level when President Obama visits India. As I tried to say, this is a partnership that's based on much more than just transactional advantage. There is transactional advantage for both, but there's more to it than just that. And I think if we if we were to act on our values and our vision of a better world, I think we would have imparted long-term stability and an enduring global significance to the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there are, or will be in a second, microphones. I'd like to ask you to please identify yourself to Ambassador Menon. Right here. Come on. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for doing this. My name is Sean Tandon. I'm a journalist with the AFP news agency. I think you might have alluded to this a little bit in your opening remarks, but the issue of currency, there is a great debate in Washington right now about the level of China's currency. How do you view that from an Indian perspective? Does India share some of the concerns about the value of the Chinese currency?
I think it's an issue that still needs to be worked through, because as of now, what we see actually is a gradual appreciation of the Chinese currency against our currency, much more so than against the dollar. So it's not an issue in India right now. But obviously, it's an issue that, concerns the world. And there have been attempts to bring it up in international fora, whether, in the Fund Bank, in the G20 as well. I don't think you'd find a common view on it yet. It depends on who you talk to. I mean, in India, in the Indian economy as well, the importers will tell you, it works for us. We get cheap goods. The manufacturers will tell you it's not a good idea at all. And so I don't think we've quite struck the balance or come to it's not the kind of debate that you have here.
Okay, I have three right here. We'll take Stan and gentleman front and Howard.
Stanley Roth, the Boeing Company. Obviously, we've seen a huge influx of cabinet level and other visitors in both directions preparing for President Obama's trip, and it leads to a lot of speculation about deliverables, what's going to happen, and in terms of how India would define a successful trip. And one of the things that we hear is being discussed intensively this week, including on your mission, is export controls. What would success look like for you? What do you hope to accomplish? I know you're not going to disclose the negotiations, but what would make something a big deal in terms of improving the U.S.-India economic relationship?
Well, I think on export controls, I think you're right. It is important because it stitches together several parts of the relationship. It enables us to work together in sensitive fields. It also enables us to work together in sunrise industries, in innovation, technology-driven sectors where we have natural comparative advantage together. So it actually is very important. It would also reflect the nature of our relationship today, where we work across the entire range of issues, whether they're security, defense issues, or just the economic issues. So for us, it's logical that actually the regime be updated, as it were, where India's recategorized and where many of the Indian entities, which we think shouldn't be on the entities list, are removed from it. How much do we want? We want everything, but let's see where we go with this.
Okay, gentleman right here.
Aziz Hanifa with India Abroad. Good to see you, Mr. Menon. As an extension of Stan's big deal question, obviously President Obama wants his visit to be sort of a transformational visit like that of President Clinton in 2000. But in recent weeks, there has been angst by U.S. business and industry over the nuclear liability law. And obviously, it's probably going to be one of the deliverables. How are you all going to alleviate this angst? And a quick part two, Jim Steinberg created a bit of a flutter when he said it would be unimaginable for China not to have a role in South Asia, but of course balanced it, saying India has a role in East Asia too. Unlike last time in the joint statement, there wasn't any New Delhi going ballistic. Is it because there are enough China hands in the ministry today, as he said?
Well, on the nuclear liability, I think what we need to do is to work our way through the issue. there are concerns among US companies about how the Indian Act will apply to them and what kind of liability it would mean for suppliers. We've started a conversation with the companies. We're also working our way through the issues because our lawyers have told us consistently that this act does not impose any additional obligations upon the suppliers, in which case there should be legal ways of dealing with this, of expressing them when in the practice of how we actually do this. So we are hoping actually to finish all the whatever governmental work we have to do on the civil liability issue before the visit, so that by the time we get to the visit, we can start the commercial negotiations and really the companies see their own way forward. I don't think it's going to be as difficult as we make it out to be. You know, I think there's a normal process, which I think is familiar to Washington, and certainly happens in Delhi. When bills are being drafted and are lying in Parliament, everybody tries for the best outcome from their own sectoral interest. I mean, I think you call it lobbying, isn't it? But we don't use the word. But the fact is that everybody puts out their expectations and tries to see what they get. Once the bill is done and it becomes an act, then I think we see how it actually works. And we don't see any real insurmountable problem in the working of the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act in practice, which would prevent US companies from working. If they have concerns and so on, we're very happy to sit down and talk to them, work it out in practice. On the Chinese role in South Asia, the Indian role in East Asia, you know, I think the whole point of today's world is that you can't draw artificial boundaries. That, you know, these are not powers who are limited to some little geographical area. We have global interests, the Chinese have global interests, you know, all of us do, and all the major powers, as I said, are not only interdependent with each other, but also are dealing with each other across a whole range of issues, none of which recognize some artificial geographical construct like South Asia or East Asia. I mean, these are interlocking circles of security, of prosperity, of whatever you want to, whichever way you look at it. So for me, this is an academic argument, you know. Oh, do they have a role? Of course, China has a presence in South Asia. It has for a long time. We've had a presence in East Asia for a long time. I mean, that's a fact, and it's something, but that presence has changed and evolved as China has changed, as South Asia has changed, as we have changed, as East Asia has changed. And it will continue to do so, and we'll keep finding equilibrium between us. I think we have long enough traditions of statecraft to be fairly confident of being able to deal with it.
If I may just I'll come back, Howard, just a sec. The last 18 months, Carnegie has been working very hard. One of our chief, most exciting projects is an attempt to negotiate a voluntary code of conduct among all the world's suppliers of nuclear reactors in order to establish rules of the road that would make possible a real resurgence of nuclear energy in a safe and secure context. One of the issues is liability, and one of the people who's been very engaged in these negotiations is Omer Brown, who's here. So let me just offer him a chance to follow up on this liability question. To your left, yeah.
Master, as Jessica said, I'm Omer Brown. I represent a group of American companies on nuclear liability matters and have been working with Carnegie on the liability portions of the Code of Conduct. I know you've been hearing from my clients that the nuclear liability law puts in jeopardy the entire U.S.-India nuclear cooperation agreement. We had a meeting last week with Dr. Banerjee in Vienna, and we're still not hearing solutions to the problem. I mean, one of the ideas that Dr. Banerjee put forth was trying to deal with this in contract. We're not sure how that can be done in terms of a contract that would supersede a law just passed by Parliament, particularly with respect to Article 46, which allows lawsuits under other laws. So we don't think that your lawyers are right that this is consistent with the international rules of the road. There are significant divergence in the Indian law compared to the nuclear liability laws of every other country with a nuclear power program. So we would encourage
I think Just to clarify, I don't think that the Indian law varies from international law to any greater degree than several other national laws. If you look at different national laws, I mean, starting from Price-Anderson at one, which is one way of dealing with the issue, all the way through what, China, Korea, various countries have done. There's a whole range of laws. But there's a certain common body of international law which applies, which is why we intend to sign the Convention on Supplementary Compensation, which I think codifies that in one place. Our lawyers say that what we've done, the Act, is in keeping with the CSC. That is entirely in conformity. You might not think so. I mean, that's a different issue.
I don't.
But the simple way, therefore, if they say so, is to work our way through it with the companies and to see that it is in practice so that the companies feel so. Now, the one thing we want to avoid is an argument between lawyers, because that can be very expensive and can take a long time. What we want to do, and which we've done when, for instance, when Mr. Imelt was in Delhi earlier this week, was to sit down with the companies and actually look at the issues, at the practicality of it. Because from a CEO's point of view, he needs the assurance that he's not signing off his company into some unlimited liability.
Yes,
that's what he's worried about. He's not worried about the law, what the law might say. He's worried about the effect on his company. And that's what we think we can address. And that's what we're hoping to do with the companies.
Well, we hope so.
And we think, actually, that by doing this, and by also starting commercial negotiations, by signing the convention and doing a whole series of steps, we think it's doable. So I think it depends on how you pose the problem, and which end of the problem you start attacking.
Yeah. Well, we've gone back to Dr. Banerjee and suggested some dates for just such meetings in New Delhi, and
Good.
we hope that
Good, I'm sure we will.
that you can encourage that those
Happily.
meetings will take place. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me remind you all, since this is being taped, to keep the mic near your mouth. Howard, and then over here. Okay.
I'm Howard Schaefer, Georgetown University. The issue of Afghanistan is sure to arise in the Obama meeting. And I wonder if you could tell us what India hopes to achieve in Afghanistan, and to deal with speculation that India would like the United States to support a broader Indian role in the conflict.
I think our goals in Afghanistan have been consistent, and this is not just in the last 8 years or in the last, it's been consistent right through. For us, a peaceful, moderate Afghanistan, which is not in anarchy or a source of extremism, of terrorism, of trouble for the entire region and ultimately for the world, I think that's the goal, and that stays the goal. We will continue to work for that goal with our partners, with the US. I mean, the US has been engaged in one way before, it's been engaged in other ways after 9/11. To the extent that we share this goal, and I think we share the goal to a very great extent, we'll continue to work together. I don't think it's for us to give the US a greater role or for the US to give us a greater role. I don't think that's the way we look at this. We look at this as a partnership, where we both go in and we're chasing the same goal. We try and do it in our own ways. Each of us has different capacities, different strengths on the ground in the region, and we'll use them accordingly. And I think that's why it's worked well in the recent past. That's why the experience of what we've been doing in Afghanistan has been good. We've concentrated on the development of Afghanistan, on rebuilding the economy. We have a commitment of about $1.5 billion. We have people on the ground. We have a series of small development projects right through the country, irrespective of what the local balance of power is. And it's worked well. We found that has actually had great impact on the ground. The US has concentrated on the security side, on the governance issues, and that also, if you think of it in the longer term of where Afghanistan was 10 years ago and where she is now, has actually resulted in progress. I think as long as we keep our eye on the ball and stick to, the main, remember what we are there for, I think that will continue. As far as India is concerned, we're going to keep doing this because it's in our immediate interests. It's our immediate neighborhood. And we felt the effects of what came out of Afghanistan when it was in chaos, when it was in anarchy, or when it was controlled by terrorist groups. We felt the effects directly, and we've known this for years, going back 20, 30 years. So this is not something that we're in for the short term, or which is going to change depending on today's fashions.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Raghuveer Gaul from India Globe in Asia today. My question is that you have so much to discuss during your visit here in Washington. Also, President Obama, of course, will have a lot of questions and answers to in India. My question is that, one, what surety, sir, do you have as far as world's largest democracy still not on the United Nations Security Council? Communist China is there and many others. And two, India is surrounded by many rogue nations. Terrorism is on the rise. And finally, what do you think, sir, about the China-Pakistan nuclear and military deal, which is on the rise in the area?
Well, on the UN Security Council, I think we've made our views quite clear over and over again. I think the world's views have evolved. And as far as I can see, they're heading in the right direction. As far as we are concerned, in terms of the distance or the gap between what the world's attitude to UN Security Council reform and what we consider a desirable outcome, I think that gap has steadily narrowed. And now that there's real meaningful negotiations going on in the United Nations itself on not just Security Council reform, but reform of the UN itself, I think, there's a real prospect of some progress. How the US chooses to do it, when the US chooses to do it, is really for the US to decide. We will keep making our views known. I don't think we're shy in any way in letting it be known what we expect. On the security environment that we face, and some of the things you mentioned are all part of that calculation. Yes, we live in a world that maybe is not the way we would have designed it if we were able to design it from first principles, but we'll deal with it. We'll live with it, we'll deal with it. We work with those whom we can. But as I said, our priority is the domestic transformation of India, for which we need a peaceful periphery, and we need an extended period of a lack of entanglements abroad. And we will work with all those who will work with us to achieve that.
We have two right here. We'll take you a second.
Walter Anderson at Johns Hopkins. Indian Ocean and the safety of the sea lanes is very important to the U.S., in part because of the oil and gas in the Persian Gulf, but other reasons as well. It's very important to India. Has the U.S. and India been in talks on this issue? And if so, what are the parameters of what they've been talking about?
We have been discussing the issue. It's something that we think, exactly as you said, we both have a very strong interest in maintaining freedom of the high seas in the security of the Indian Ocean. We're working together in practice as well against piracy, for instance, off the Somali coast. And there are several instances, whether it's humanitarian relief post-tsunami, where we work together. This is an area where actually cooperation is increasing. We do joint exercises, but not just in the Indian Ocean, because I think, as I said earlier, it's very hard to draw these boundaries in the commons. And it's an area where we have a dialogue going on, and where, as the situation evolves, I think we'll see new responses by both of us.
Now here in the second row, and then I'll go take two in the back.
Yeah, I'm Rajesh Kadian. Welcome to America again, Ambassador. You haven't talked on Burma. And November not only marks the president's visit to India, but also elections in Burma. Mm-hmm. And there have been clashes between ethnic Chinese and the Burmese in the recent past. Would you comment on the Indian position in Burma, please?
Yeah, we've tried to engage with Myanmar because we have, quite apart from there's an Indian population in Myanmar still, large population, was larger in the past, but also because we have a very long common border, and some of the areas on the Myanmarese side at least, had insurgent groups which were very active in those areas. So we had a common interest in security in the area. We also have tried to work with Myanmar to try and develop the economy. We are exploring for oil, for instance, off the Myanmarese coast. So we've tried to engage with Myanmar and to encourage Myanmar in what they themselves say is their attempt to rebuild democracy and to come back to the international mainstream. We would like, through a process of engagement, to actually help that process. It's a slow process. It's not always successful. We've consistently urged democratization within Myanmar. We think the election could be a step towards it, but we'll have to see how it actually works out in practice. It could be one step and a significant step in that transition. But I think we'll all have to work at it with the Myanmarese to see that it comes out right.
With your approval, I'll take two at a time because the number seems to be multiplying as we go along. So there are two right back there next to each other. Let's take those two and then we'll...
Hi, Ambassador. Daryl Sung from the Singapore Embassy. Just wondering about India's view of the U.S. Role in Southeast Asia. There's been a lot of discussion lately about regional architecture, and the U.S. has decided to join the East Asia Summit, and we're wondering, which India is a part of already, and we're wondering about India's views on that decision. Thank you.
Yeah, I think as I said, for us, the more open, the more flexible, the more inclusive, the better. I mean, we've consistently argued that the U.S. should actually be there because the U.S. is a nation power. Secondly, I think flexible because, if you look at the situation in Asia, I mean, the balance of power itself is changing very rapidly. There's several powers rising at the same time. You look at Indonesia, you look at South Korea, you look at Singapore's role in the area. These are all changing so rapidly that whatever system, whatever architecture you try and put in place has to be flexible and has to be capable of evolving as things change. But to your direct question, we like it. We support it.
That's a good, a clear answer. Right behind.
Hi,
not much of a diplomat.
I'm Lizbeth Kaufman from the Podesta Group, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about U.S.-Indian discussions on Sri Lanka and whether India shares or has any concerns about the rollback of democracy there.
Okay, let's take one more. Oh, right there in the back.
Daniel McKaylee with the Council on Foreign Relations. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the global common several times, and there was one question about sea lanes in particular. What else do you see as providing potential room for cooperation with the United States? Space, cybersecurity, and what kinds of more specific initiatives are under discussion? Thanks.
Great, okay.
On Sri Lanka, frankly, for us, it's, we're dealing with a neighbor who's had a troubled history, has just come out of a civil war, has to repair the damages of that civil war and the effects that that's had on their own society. So two things become very important. One is reconciliation between the communities, and we've tried very hard to help in that process, in reconciliation, in trying to bring life back to normal for especially the areas where most of the war was fought, in the north and the east. And we have a huge program to try and do that. We've discussed it with the US as well, which is also participating in this effort. And we've tried very hard to make sure that by doing this, and this is a common India-US interest really, that we can prevent the re-emergence of the sort of terrorism that came out of Sri Lanka, which in our case cost us the life of a prime minister. But equally, I think there is also the work of political recovery in Sri Lanka and of creating an order within which not just the restoration of democracy, but more than that, an order within which all the communities feel that they can determine their own futures, that they have a say in their own in the choices that affect their lives. That's a much more sensitive task. And while we will continue to encourage Sri Lanka to to do what she says, what the Sri Lankan authorities have consistently told us they want to do. I think ultimately that's their internal affair, and it's something they'll have to take the tough decisions themselves on. But we are heartened by the fact that there is a process of going on, and Sri Lanka did manage through 27 years of civil war to actually maintain the democratic nature of her polity. And I think actually that's one reason why she came out where she did at the end of it, was because she stayed a democracy and a relatively open economy right through that process. And I don't think we should underestimate that.
On the global issues.
The global commons, I don't want to, start talking about what we're going to see in the future at the end of the visit or soon thereafter. We have, actually, to all your issues that you mentioned space, you said cyber. The simple answer is yes, yes, yes. We're discussing them all. We're seeing where we can work together. We find that we do have common approaches. We do have similar interests, and these are all areas of great interest to us. But I don't want to get into listing out what I think will emerge at the end of the visit. I don't think this is the time or place to do that.
Would you include climate on that list as areas where we see some convergence?
Well, certainly. On clean energy and so on, we've been discussing how much we need to do together and what we could do. And I think that's an area where, if we applied Indian and US ingenuity and technology and basically the application of mind to this problem, I think we could actually come up with good solutions. There again, I think we have to move away from a pure negotiating approach between lawyers and positions and rights and obligations into actually producing outcomes which work for us. And I think it's doable on climate change.
We had a question up here.
Mr. Menon, Seema Sirohi from the Bengal Post. It's a new newspaper. I wanted to ask you about your assessment about the presence of uniformed Chinese in the Gilgit and Baltistan area, as Selig Harrison reported. And a related question, do you think China is being more assertive / aggressive of late in sort of claiming as national interest entire bodies of waters that many, many countries lay claim to? And then I have a question on India and Pakistan. There's a body of opinion here that aggressively argues and is sympathetic somewhat to Pakistan's position that India should resolve the Kashmir dispute because that removes a major reason for the jihadi network to be active. Do you agree with that?
I think the Chinese government has denied that there are Chinese armed PLA personnel in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. They've denied it to us. They've denied it in public as well. Our views on the status of the territory, that it's part of India, it's an occupied portion which Pakistan has occupied since 1948. I think that's quite clear, and we've made it known. We also make it known to all our friends, including to China. About characterizing Chinese behavior as, somehow having changed, or I find that very difficult to do, frankly, and that's not really for states to go around doing. I think what the important thing in the South China Sea is that, yes, certainly there are several states which have interests there, but also have competing claims, and I think different people have offered different solutions of how this needs to be dealt with. I don't think there's one view yet. We'll have to see how that works itself out. There's clearly a very active discussion going on, not just in the region, but around the world. Let's see where that comes out at the end. On India-Pakistan, it's, on Kashmir, I think we've made it quite clear that we are willing to discuss all issues with Pakistan. But we've also made it quite clear that as long as we face terrorist attacks from Pakistani territory, there will be limits on how far this dialogue can proceed. No democratic government of India can be so insensitive to what's going on or to popular opinion in India that it then decides that somehow it can settle issues without there being a larger resolution and an improvement in the relationship. Today, we are in a stage where we are trying to restore the dialogue. Prime Minister met with his counterpart in Thimphu. The Foreign Minister went to Islamabad in July. We're trying to see whether we can get the dialogue going. But quite frankly, when it comes to linking that to the existence of jihadi terrorism in Pakistan, or what it is doing to Pakistan itself, to the region, to Afghanistan, to us, I don't see the link. I mean, this is not, if you look at it over a slightly longer period, when we were actually engaged in a full-fledged composite dialogue with Pakistan in 2005, 2007, and were making considerable progress on the issues that divided us, didn't seem to stop the terrorism or the terrorists. They might use it as a pretext, but I don't think there is a linkage between the two.
We have time for just two more. Is there anybody else who would like? We covered everything.
I think we've talked.
And we have.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then I think I want to also mention that we're very pleased to welcome India's ambassador to the U.S., Meera Shankar, here, and it's a great pleasure to have her back. She's been a regular participant in our work. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Menon for a wonderful session. Very.